Thank you. This is, you are far and away the most engaging member of the audience, but I'm hoping to warm the rest of you up. And I also want to make a small complaint, because nobody warned me that I was going to be following on from Charlie and Lola Meet the Radiotherapy Team, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And I don't know if the same is being done for chemo and leukemia treatment, but I certainly hope it is, because that would have gone a very long way for my little boy. But I'll tell you about him in a moment. Being a parent of a small child who gets, in our case, a tumour, is one of the most shocking, frightening, life-changing, and in some respects, we would also say positive, in that it engages you with some of the things that are real about life, experiences, I think, that anybody probably can go through. The parents, as you will appreciate, of a 2.5-year-old, take on all the fear about what happens in the long run. Unfortunately, the little boy takes on most of the fear of what happens with the day-to-day treatments, and particularly the things that happen in the rather shocking few weeks of diagnosis and the scans and tests that go with that, but with the treatment as well, until it becomes that embracing blanket of security where you go into your treatment, in our case at Great Ormond Street, and it kind of feels better than when you're not having the treatment, because you know what's happening and you know the people and you're familiar with it. But I want to talk about the shock of the new. I might also just mention, because I think it's relevant, that I think for all of us who've been through it, that shock never entirely goes away. It's always there just under the surface, and things reawaken it. And I mention that just because we're now 2.5 years out of the chemotherapy and the operation that Arthur had. Thank goodness, touch wood, everything continues well, and at the end of this year we'll stop going in for the regular scans and blood tests that Arthur still has. But on March 2nd, we had another baby, our third child, and on, I think it was March the 22nd, we went to see the GP. Well, in fact, the midwife came to us and said, he's still a bit yellow, a bit worried about that. I think you should go to see the GP. And they said, actually, you should go and see the GP now, which was an echo of something that happened 2.5 years ago. And then when we got to the GP, they said, actually, we think you should go to Royal Cornwall Hospital, to the special care baby unit, now. By which stage my wife was beside herself. In fact, she was beside herself with me for not being as beside myself as she was at one point. And we drove in, and then we had some blood tests, and he did manage to score rather high, so they had to do some more blood tests, but actually everything was fine. But you realise just how close the emotional content is when you have that bigger reaction to somebody saying, just think you should go to the special care baby unit. So that shock of the new doesn't leave very easily. And the bit that I suspect, and here all I can do is what my suspicions are and see how they click with all of you, is I suspect enormous amounts of attention is paid to those first few days of diagnosis. In our case, it was. We thought he'd bruised his coccyx, fallen down a couple of stairs more than once, seemed to be hurting when he fell over in a sandpit and came off a slide in a sandpit. It seemed a bit odd. There was a bruise started to be noticeable, and so eventually got round to going to the doctor. Don't want to go to the doctor too soon with a little bruise, didn't seem necessary, but maybe he's cracked something. And the GP said, I think you need to go to St Thomas's now. And then they put us in a little room because it said something in the note that we didn't know about. So they thought we might want to be on our own, although we had no idea why we might want to be on our own. And then it started to go from blood tests to suddenly having x-rays, and suddenly being told scans, and the hours went by and we got really scared. But I think everybody knows that bit, and they know that when they come after more scans, and you've been there several days now, and things are really very scary indeed, and in our case, we'd negotiated to go home, although he was cannulated and had screamed a lot when he was cannulated. But fortunately, my sister-in-law happened to be a child specialist nurse at St Thomas's. Now, in the past, she was actually at the time in East London, so she could look after it and clean it up through the night so we could go home, which was great. but you get really, really scared, and you're kind of working it all out. And you're hoping it's not, but you're thinking it is, but they're not saying, because they're saying we don't really know yet. And we would really appreciate it, by the way, if you just were a bit more honest at that point, because we're kind of there already. But all of that stuff, and when they finally come to tell you the diagnosis and 8 people troop into the ward and say, would you come to a room around the corner? And you kind of think, well, that was what we were expecting, and there's not much doubt about that, but is he going to die, or is there a possibility of treatment? And do we want to put him through the treatment? Is a big question. Is there a chance? Is there any point to this? I think all of that isn't the bit of the shock of the new that I want to talk about, because you actually all know that. Those of you who've been through it have been through it. Those of you who are specialists in one form or another kind of know that story. You spend a lot of time, I imagine, wishing you didn't have to do that and trying to work out how to do it. I wanted to talk about a little bit else, which, for those of you who know Pulp Fiction, there's the wonderful bit of the film which is all about the date between John Travolta and Uma Thurman, and they're sat there very awkwardly, and he basically wants to know whether it's true that Uma Thurman's husband threw someone off a balcony. And she asks him, is there anything you want to talk about? And he says, well, actually there is. And this little smile plays across his face. And she says, oh, that's interesting. And I remember meeting with Mark when we talked about Maite becoming a trustee. And that essentially was the question. And the little smile, and it was, yeah, well, actually there is. Because in those months that Arthur went through his treatment, one thing struck us as something which we thought could be improved quite easily, and possibly wasn't so high up the agenda as how you tell people your child's got cancer, or how you communicate what the treatment programme will be, or how you talk about, in Arthur's case, he was stage 4 and what that means, and nevertheless it's childhood cancer, so yes, really it is treatable, and no, it isn't like being a grown-up, and it's all very different. But the stuff that we really found, that we thought maybe, yes, there is something we'd like to talk about, is about the difficulties that you have at the first stages of treatment. So you've gone through those scans, you've gone through the horrors of the cannulation for the first time, you've got a treatment process, you've asked those questions about, can it happen tomorrow, please? Do we really have to wait 2 or 3 weeks? Because we've heard that cancer, you have to do it immediately, and yet you all seem to be dragging your feet. Quite an important thing, I think, to explain to us, but kind of you will never satisfy us, because we would like it yesterday, please. In fact, we'd have liked to have seen the GP several months ago if we'd only known. But when you go into the ward, and we were treated at Great Ormond Street. We are incredibly grateful. There were some fantastic people there. They perform miracles as far as we're concerned. But those first few trips into the hospital are bewildering, frightening, intimidating, even though you've already been through some of the talks and all the rest of it about what's going to happen. And some of the stuff that you need help with is really, really basic, and yet in a really busy hospital it's quite hard to deliver, and we accept that, and we just had a thought about one way of doing it, but maybe there are others. So your child is, you arrive for your first treatment, and you go into a busy waiting room, and the receptionists have got their head down and they sit over there, please, and people are running around preparing, as we now know, the chemo, and all sorts of things are happening, and you're sitting there absolutely bloody terrified, and no one has actually said at that point, you can get a cup of tea from the kitchen, because they don't tell you that till you're in the bed. No one has actually put an arm around you and said, are you all right? Which you're probably not. You go and you are attached to that bag of bloody awful fluid, which you are petrified of. And more than that, the staff are actually treating it like it's pretty petrifying as well. It wasn't the first time, but it was the second time that someone was fully masked up whilst they attached him. But certainly when we went through to collect all the machinery and be attached first, people have been masked and all the rest of it preparing it. This is all bloody frightening. You wheel it through, and you haven't wheeled a trolley behind a 2.5-year-old. Well, even after you've done it 6 times, it's pretty terrifying. The first time, well, what happens if he pulls it out? It is the most terrifying walk. I don't know what it was like the first time that Armstrong walked on the moon, but maybe he was scared, maybe he was just kind of overexcited. But it does, it feels like the famous silver service waiter who's carrying in the Royal Palace a tray full of glasses of champagne on the silver tray, and all he has to do is walk down the corridor to where the Queen is, without falling over or tripping, and he's done it a million times, but the time he does it for the first time with the tray of champagne feels pretty terrifying. That's what it's like if you're holding that trolley, and the fact that you've got 3 members of staff fussing around you doesn't actually make it easier, it makes it all the more terrifying. But no one said to you it doesn't matter too much, it won't be the end of the day if it pulls out. Good idea not to, but nevertheless it's all right. When we're in the room and Arthur is attached up, and because he was all day we were always first in the room pretty much, and we're on our own, the machine starts bleeping. Well, no one's mentioned that the machine might bleep. Maybe if they did, they'd said just press the button and we'll come. In fact, no one had actually shown us where the button was. So fortunately, in my case, I was there with my wife. I wasn't on my own, as a lot of people are at treatment. So I ran down like the screaming banshee, going, the machine's bleeping, I think my son's dying, save him now, or words to that effect. And they're kind of going, we'll be there in a minute. I could have strangled them. No, I don't think you understand. He's attached to chemotherapy. Come now. The machine's bleeping. Of course, 6 months later, it was lean across, click the button, because someone had got round to telling you. Can you walk out of the room when they're on the machine? As I said, we were mostly there 2 together, but if you're on your own, can you go to the loo? Can you get a cup of tea? It's a 2.5-year-old. How do you manage that? They told you probably where the tea room is. You've forgotten the number, but that's all sortable. But do you interrupt someone? And who is it you interrupt to remind them of the number? It took a long time before anyone explained that round the corner was the most brilliant place that did pizzas and that you didn't have to always eat the hospital food. It took a longer time before we dared sneak some alcohol up into Arthur's room. It would have been quite nice if someone had tipped us off that they probably wouldn't throw us out of the hospital for doing that. Because bloody hell, we needed an alcohol sometimes. Might have been good if someone had said the first time that we had to be overnight in the share care hospital, it really is okay if you want to sleep in the bed with them, which we did. You don't have to be on the mat on the floor or whatever it is, and that's absolutely fine. In fact, it's probably a good idea. And we thought a lot about all of this because people are busy and they know how it's working. And some of it is just about getting through to those very busy, wonderful professionals who we got to know and like, and lots of them became brilliant friends, and we still say hello to them when we go and see Ski, who you saw earlier, speaking, Dr. Mikulski. We meet up with the play specialist that we got to know, even though Arthur can barely remember who she is anymore, except that he met her last time on his blood test. But at first, they're just strange professionals who know how it works, and some of it's just remembering that parents there the first day or two don't, and they're absolutely petrified, and when the machine goes bleep, it would be really helpful if we already knew that that's what they do and not to worry about it, and preferably even that you can just lean across and do the button. But we thought, and this is where the little smile comes in, and yes, we did have something to say, if it's not possible, and it may be possible to improve some of that with training, but if it's not possible, we do think that there are a lot of parents who've been through it, and it might be just nice to ask some of us if we'd be prepared to be the person you could call on the phone or could pop into Great Ormond Street for the first time that somebody's there with a child that has a sacrococcygeal germ cell tumour, because we know quite a lot about that, and we can't guarantee the treatment will work, but we can be pretty helpful on whether the machine bleeps and where the pizza comes from, and maybe there's a missing resource there in hospitals that desperately struggle for the staff to tell you those things, or sit there when you'd like to go to the loo rather than when they can free themselves half an hour later. And then I just wrote down a couple of other things which I'll mention very quickly because I'm standing between you and a drink, which is the worst possible slot of the day. I don't know if it is still the case that the protocol is, when you ask what kind of line we want, not to advise us. Do you want a Hickman line or whatever the other thing's called? I mean, I know it's a Hickman, it's a Wrigley, isn't it? Kind of like, for those of us with younger children. Do you want a Wrigley or not? And we had so many conversations where they took us through the sheets that said this is what is and this is what does, and we kept saying, well, which do you suggest? And they kept going, well, we're not meant to tell you that, so this is what this and this is what that. until we were banging our heads against walls because we have no fucking idea of my English and how we meant to possibly choose. And eventually, by basically putting someone's arm up behind their back and pressing their neck against the wall, they went, well, personally, I'd use a Wrigley. So, okay, we'll have one of those. Thanks very much. The codes might be a good idea to check with us before you talk to our children. We just saw a video that said cancer. Arthur has a lump. He did know about chemo. In fact, he could tell you at the time, and I can't even do this, what the chemicals were, because he got to know all that. He was a very 4-year-old, 2.5-year-old. In fact, he was a pretty 40-year-old, 2.5-year-old. We had the brilliant registrar who came in and totally talked to him like that right from the word go. And she also, after work, took us to show us where the supermarket was around the corner so we could buy some essentials. We also had the I think it was a registrar, who came in and basically said "oochie coochie coo" to Arthur, who looked at her like she was completely mad and refused to have anything to do with her. But people didn't come and ask us first before they came into the room. Over and over again, the professionals would come in and start talking in front of Arthur. Excuse me, I had to say every time, Arthur's listening, so depending on what you want to say, maybe we all should step out. But other times, maybe you should be talking to Arthur, and we heard that earlier on, even at 2.5, and certainly by 3.5, when he was as expert on most of this as many of the people who were doing some of the overnight care. That got a laugh, didn't it? What is it about being really good in a children's cancer unit that means you don't have to do overnight work, and being really bad bank nurse who doesn't seem to know what she's doing at all, and on one occasion did actually manage to give him the wrong treatment, seems to turn up at night just when you're sleeping and not really on the ball to stop them doing the wrong thing at the wrong moment. The advocate. There is always someone who is the brilliant advocate for you in the staff team. Might be good to have arranged that in advance and tell us who they are. We had endless difficulties getting a scan for the operation, to the point that the operation was in doubt in timing-wise. We did find someone who was a brilliant advocate, but actually, even at the stage of being there 6 months, it wasn't obvious who was going to get that sorted out for us. Too many cooks spoil the broth. I don't know how many of you have had the experience. Your child is going in for cannulation. They know what cannulation is. They know they absolutely hate it. You're told to put cream on half an hour in advance. Guaranteed way to have them completely beside themselves by the time anything happens. There may not be a way of avoiding it, although it was worse the time they forgot to put the cream on and decided to do it anyway. But it doesn't actually help to have the play specialist, 2 nurses, a doctor, and both parents all doing separate versions of how to calm your child down. One of them at a time probably would work, all 5 or 6 screaming at your child at the same time with increasingly high-pitched voices as he screamed back. That doesn't work. The stern professional. I'm being very indiscreet here. Go down to radiotherapy. Arthur had some particularly bad experiences, including one where he came round whilst taped down to the deck of a machine, which was that near off his nose, and because as soon as he woke up, he touched the machine, it went into lockdown, so we had to drag him out from the machine, pulling off the bits of tape. It would have been a bit better if the member of staff involved hadn't, right from the word go, been treating it as this is clearly a very bad boy, and the way to make him behave himself is be severe. There are training things, I think, all through the staff line, even in hospitals that are child specialist, but it's not that beginning bit. It's little things along the way. But there's also the brilliant communicator. And I just want to say thank you to the amazing range of staff who actually made, I'm taking suggestions for changes, but actually by and large it was the most amazing experience, and was best summed up by the fact that once the Wrigley was out, the needle phobia that had come into existence through cannulation really set in, given that he needed a blood test every month, and that meant a needle in his arm. And we did have one or two experiences of the 5 people all around him whilst he screamed and they started screaming back. But what we actually had was the most brilliant registrar who is best mates with Arthur. We think she's a best mate too, but actually Arthur's kind of got her. And she just took the time to work out how to find a way to help Arthur deal with it. And now he puts his arm out, shuts his eyes, counts to 20, and tells her off if she hasn't finished by then. And it's amazing to see, and it's only because after 1 or 2 experiences, she sat down and said, I've been thinking about how we do this, Arthur, and had a heart-to-heart with him and helped him through it. And that kind of thing is what makes all the difference. And thank you very much for so many people like you who made that possible.